lately. So there were these two guys that were sitting on an airplane, and one was an elderly gentleman and another one was a lawyer. And the elderly gentleman, like I like to do, just wanted to close his eyes and, kind of turn over and take a nap. And the lawyer was all full of lots of energy and he wanted to talk. And finally, he couldn't get the guy to really cooperate with him. So he finally said, "Hey, let's play a game." And the guy said, "No, I'd rather take a nap." He goes, No, let's play a game." He says, "I'll tell you what, I'll ask you a question, and if you can't answer my question, you give me $5, and you ask me a question, and if I can't answer your question, I'll give you $5. And the old gentleman said, "No, I don't think so. I just want to take a nap." So the lawyer was really kind of perturbed. He says, "I'll tell you what, I'll up the ante. If I ask you a question and you can't answer it, you'll give me $5, and you ask a question, and if I can't answer it, I'll give you $500. So the older gentleman said, "Okay, I guess." He really wanted to take a nap, but he figured this guy was going to keep it up, and he might as well go ahead and do it. So the lawyer started off first, and he says, "What's the distance between the earth and the moon? How many miles is it between the earth and the moon?" And the older gentleman thought for a moment, and he pulled out his wallet and he took a $5 bill and handed it to the lawyer without saying anything because he didn't know the distance. So the lawyer says, "Okay, it's your turn." So the older gentleman thought for a minute and he said, "What is it that walks up a hill with 3 legs and comes down a hill with 4 legs?" And the lawyer was sat there and thought, he got on his phone and he got into the Wi-Fi and started looking up on Wi-Fi and trying to find that out and Googling it and all that other stuff. And then he finally called some of his friends. He got on the airphone and called some of his friends, and they couldn't answer it. And an hour went by, and an hour and a half went by, and he just couldn't figure it out. And he says, "Okay, I give up. I can't answer your question, And so he handed him $500. And so the older gentleman turned over and started taking a nap. And the lawyer finally said, wait a minute. You got to answer my question. What goes up a hill with 3 legs and comes down with 4 legs?" And the older gentleman opened up his wallet and handed him $5. Oh, God, make me that wise the older I get, right? David was writing this psalm towards the end of his life. And he was writing this psalm because he knew what it was to live for a good part of his life with a broken heart. He knew what it was like to have a lot of trauma in his life. Now, trauma, the way that we talk about it in both our modern society as well as in even Bible times, is the same thing. Trauma means wound. That's all it means. It means wound. The only time that the word trauma actually shows up in the Bible is in the parable of the Good Samaritan. When the Good Samaritan finds the man and takes him into his house, and it says, and he treated his wounds. That's the word trauma. So we all understand trauma in terms of when you fall down and hurt yourself, and you skin your knee, or you cut yourself, or you have some kind of an injury on the outside. But the reality is, more people in our society and throughout the world deal with so much trauma on the inside. They deal with so much wounding on the inside. And that trauma can dig so deep that it changes the sense of not only who we think we are, but it changes what we think is available for us. We see David the very first time in the book of Samuel, and the prophet Samuel has been sent to the house of Jesse because Saul, the first king of Israel, has lost his kingship due to disobedience to God. And so God sent Samuel to the house of Jesse to anoint the new king of Israel. And when he gets to the house, Samuel says to Jesse, bring out all of your sons. And so Jesse brings out all of his sons, all in quotation marks. And if you've read that story in the Bible, you know that Samuel goes down the line, and although these are very handsome, very great young men, none of them is the king of Israel that God is looking for. And so finally Samuel turns to Jesse and says, hey man, what's up? Is there, the man's not here. Where is he? And Jesse says, well, there's David, but he's out shepherding sheep. And there's the sense that many Bible commentators believe that David was not considered to be a full son of the house. That is, for whatever reason, when Samuel called for all of Jesse's sons to come out, that Samuel was not considered part of that group. And it could be because David was the product of an illicit affair, some kind of relationship that his father Jesse had with another woman or with a concubine or something. But there was a sense about David that he really didn't have a sense of belonging and having a full share of the inheritance in the house. David wrote in Psalm 51, later on in his life, he said, in sin I was conceived. So there was a sense of the shadow over David's life, that there was something about him where he didn't belong in this family. He wasn't considered a favored son. There wasn't a sense of really being significant or having value or having any kind of sense of purpose. I mean, he was basically used to do all of the what we would call servant chores, shepherding the sheep, later on taking food to his brothers up in battle. And guys, that's a trauma that many of us have experienced even in our own families. We've experienced what it is to feel like we didn't belong. We experienced what we felt like we really weren't considered significant, weren't considered loved, weren't considered truly cared for. And the purpose of parents is to do just that, is to give their children a sense of belonging, a sense that you're valuable and significant, a sense that you're loved and cared for, a sense of identity and a sense of purpose and future. And when you don't get that, that's a kind of a trauma that leaves kind of a hole in your soul. It makes you feel like you've been missing something in life. And we see this a lot with children who've been put into foster care, children who maybe have been raised up in single-parent households where the parent that was there was so busy just trying to make ends meet that there wasn't a whole lot of time for nurturing for the children. Whatever the circumstance would be, it's a traumatic thing that, although it may not be physical violence or abuse, it certainly is something that affects the child's well-being in such a way that it can have an impact on the rest of that child's life, specifically in regards to the idea of identity and purpose and belonging. David knew what that was like. And as I shared with the team that we were training today, every one of us has a soul. We have a body, we have a spirit, but we also have a soul. And in that soul, there are four components. There's a mind, that is the way that you think. There's a will that gives you the power to choose. There's emotions, which is how you feel. And then there's your identity, what you think about yourself. And all of those reside in the soul. Whenever you encounter trauma in your life, whenever there's something bad that happens to you, or as in David's case, what we're talking about here, where he didn't get what he needed from his parents, It has an effect upon the soul that the Bible refers to as brokenheartedness. It's the idea that it shatters your soul to such an extent that it affects everything about your life. There's a pediatrician by the name of Nadine Burke Harris. She, graduating from medical school, decided she really wanted to make a difference in children's lives. And so she set up a children's wellness clinic in one of the poorest sections of San Francisco, California. And what she began to find out is that she found out that no matter how much she treated a child's physical disorders, that the same cycle didn't change. That all she was doing was treating symptom after symptom after symptom. And what she discovered through a test called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Survey, was as she gave these children the survey, she would find these children, by the time that they were 5 or 6 years old, that they were having 4 or 5 trauma-related events that was not only affecting their emotional well-being, but it was actually affecting their physical well-being. And that the incredible connection between the mind and the body is so strong that unless you get the trauma healed in the soul, you're not going to have success at treating the trauma in the rest of the body. She found statistics like for any child that has 4 or more adverse childhood experiences, the risk of developing cardiopulmonary disease, that is heart and lung disease, raises 4 to 6 times. The risk of having high blood pressure and strokes with 4 or more adverse childhood experiences raises 6 times. There's all these incredible statistics that have little to do with genetics and have more to do with the kind of life that that child experiences through that adverse childhood experience. She wrote a book, for those of you that are interested in helping children, called The Deepest Well. The Deepest Well. And she gives the example that, when you're a missionary doctor out in Africa someplace, if you're treating people who have diarrhea, excuse me for you talking about diarrhea tonight, but I'm going to talk about it. If you're treating people with diarrhea and they keep getting diarrhea, you don't just keep treating the diarrhea. See, I used that term 5 times already. Aren't you excited that you came tonight? But what you have to do is you have to go to the source of what's causing it. And in many missionary villages, the source is a bad well. And you have to go and fix the well before you can bring healing to what's physically going on. See, in our society today, we look at people who have mental illness or mental health problems or anxiety, or they have a lot of fear, they have a lot of things. And what we do is we give them lots of things like medicine, and give them lots of things where they go into counseling, and we give them lots of different advices about how to cope with what they're going through. But so much of the answers that we give people have to do with coping with what you've got, rather than going to the source to heal the problem in the first place. David knew what it was like to not only have this problem at home, have this problem with just not feeling like he belonged, not being celebrated and appreciated. But many of you know that later David went and he killed a giant, and he became the chief warrior of Israel, and he became a bloody man. The chant was of David that Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands. And he became such a man of war that by the time he was king, he wanted to build a temple for God in Jerusalem. And God says, I can't let you do it because you've shed too much blood. And brothers and sisters, let me say this to you, that we celebrate, we honor our veterans, our first responders, those that have faithfully laid down their lives so that we can be free and we can be safe. But the human soul was never created by God to carry the burden and the weight of having to kill people, to having to endure going through seeing people killed and injured and blown up and things like that. And so what happens is that just those very experiences have a tendency to shatter the human soul in such a way that we carry those memories around with us. And they haunt us, they bother us. So whether it's being a military veteran, whether it's being a first responder, police officer, firefighter, or emergency medical technician, or maybe you've been involved in situations in your own life where through disasters, hurricanes, car accidents, things like that, you carry the weight of those traumatic experiences with you. And you might have things like panic attacks, anxiety, fear. And once again, the best that our society can do, the best that medical technology can do, and thank God for medical technology, but the best that they can do for that is give you lots of medicine and do their best to give you some counseling. But they don't deal with the source. And the source is you carry a broken heart. You carry a traumatized soul that has endured some awful things. We wonder, for instance, why there's such an epidemic of self-harm and suicide among our young people today. Why so many young people under the age of 30 are involved in all sorts of behaviors, self-harming behaviors. And when you ask them what's going on with them, you find out that, well, they just hate themselves. They feel a lot of shame, they feel a lot of guilt. And when you find more and you try to go beyond the surface, you find that they've been through a lot of trauma themselves. They've been through a lot of things as a child that no child should have to go through. They've been through experiences of abuse where they were abused by somebody else that damaged their soul, and it makes an imprint upon their soul by which they begin to identify with that. God sent Jesus Christ into this world to give us hope, not only for a future that one day when we die, we accept His grace and mercy that will go to heaven, but He sent Jesus into this world to give us hope that we can actually live an abundant life right here on earth. That life was not supposed to be just all about suffering and carrying burdens. But Jesus said in John chapter 10, verse 10, I have come that you might have life and have it more abundantly. It's the thief that comes to steal, kill, and destroy. What does that mean? It simply means this. There are things that Jesus Christ died on the cross for, things that Jesus suffered in His passion, that we can experience the benefits of those right now. For instance, in Isaiah 53, when the prophet is prophesying about what Jesus is going to do, it says this. It says in verse 3, He was despised and forsaken of men, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, like one from whom men hide their face. He was despised, and we did not esteem Him. Surely our griefs He Himself bore, and our sorrows He carried. Yet we ourselves esteemed Him stricken, smitten of God and afflicted. But he was pierced through for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The chastening for our well-being fell upon him, and by his scourging we are healed. The two phrases that I want you to focus in on that verse is, he was chastened for our well-being. The root of the word well-being is the same root by which the word shalom comes from. And many of us know the word shalom. If you've been around church at all, you know that shalom means peace. But if you've dug any deeper into that, you know that shalom means much more than peace. It actually is a covenant blessing of wholeness, that you as a person, the well-being that you experience would be a wholeness in every area of your life, so that you would experience wholeness in your soul, wholeness in your thinking, wholeness in your relationships, wholeness in your physical health, wholeness in your relationships. In everything that touches your life, you would know wholeness. And this prophecy said that Jesus endured and took on our griefs, the chastening for our well-being. And then this is where it gets really tough. It says, by his scourging we are healed. We focus so much on the cross, as we have it up here, because the cross is where Jesus shed his blood for our sins, and by which we have a relationship with God. But many times we have a tendency to skip over what happened to him before the cross. And what happened to Jesus before the cross was that he was taken by the soldiers, and his body was put upon a whipping post, and he was stripped naked. And the Romans had a horrific instrument of torture called a cat of nine tails. And in that whip was strips of leather, and at the end of the strips of leather were pieces of bone and metal and rock. And as that whip was put upon the person's body, the bits would grab onto the flesh and literally rip the flesh open, so that each time the body was hit, and by the way, they used the professionals to do this, the ones who knew how to maximize the most pain in the whipping. The flesh would be whipped, would be tore up, and so that by the time they got done with Jesus in terms of his whipping, it says here in the scripture that his image was so marred as if he couldn't even be distinguished from any human being. And it's in the promise of Isaiah 53 that the prophet says that it's by his trauma, our trauma can be healed. The horrific trauma that Jesus endured was endured for you and me. So that no matter how bad your trauma has been, whether it's been the trauma of not getting what you wanted, what you needed from your parents, or whether it's the trauma of horrific abuse, beating, war injuries, whatever it is, no matter the spectrum of the trauma, the brokenheartedness that you carry, your God provided a means by which you don't have to carry that trauma any longer. In other words, he went to the well that was causing the problem, and he cleansed the well with the blood of his own son. Why is this important for you and I tonight? Because the hope that I have to give you tonight is that Jesus came to declare good news to you. And it says in Isaiah chapter 61, this amazing phrase, about Jesus. The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to declare good news to the afflicted, to the poor, to the traumatized, to the victimized. The good news is this: He has come to heal your brokenheartedness, to declare liberty to your captivity and freedom to your imprisonment, to declare the favorable year of the Lord and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn, to say to those who mourn in Zion, giving you a garland of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of gladness and joy instead of mourning and sorrow, the mantle and garment of praise instead of a spirit of heaviness, so that your identity would no longer be the afflicted, the poor, the victimized, and the traumatized, but instead you would be known as an oak of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, that He would be glorified. In that moment, you understand that no matter how difficult your life has been, God never intended you to live a life under the burden of trauma and pain, but instead His desire for you is to live the life that Jesus promised you. And that life is a life of abundance. It's a life of freedom. It's a life of peace. It's a life of joy. I want to show you just briefly a video testimony of a man that actually I didn't pray for. I didn't get to pray for him. Somebody that I trained, just like I trained the people here earlier tonight, prayed. He was, you'll hear his story. You hear how he had two really bad things happen to him. But what I want you to hear is he's a believer in Jesus. He's walked with Jesus most of his life. But because of the trauma that he carried, he suffered greatly. But about 3 or 4 minutes into the testimony, he'll talk about what happened when he really saw himself as God saw him. And I believe the testimony will touch your life. This is Eric.
So in 2004, I was in the National Guard as a combat medic, and I had a heat stroke, and 4 days later I was injured by lightning. And during that time, I had developed fibromyalgia, and it was, as we know, it was debilitating. I ended up losing my income because I couldn't work. A whole lot of thoughts were going through my head. The depression from fibromyalgia was very much a struggle. There were thoughts of suicide. There were thoughts of worthlessness. The pain was constant. It put a strain on my marriage. And I really didn't have a lot of hope at all. You go from being a combat medic, and I had a former wife as a police officer and firefighter. You go from somebody of action and a man doing things of constant work and constant helping people and going to zero. And you wonder where am I going with this? Where's God in this? And you get lost. I've been doing a good job of trying to suck it up and be quiet and not talk to people about my problems. At first I was whining and complaining and telling people, man, this is where's God in this? I love God and God loves me and I know He doesn't do these things, but here I am hurting and bitter, hurting my heart. A friend of mine said, hey, I think you could really use some help. I think you could probably benefit with some deliverance prayer. And I was like, well, I've been a lifelong Christian, and the Lord helped me lead people to Christ, and I thought I had an understanding of how that worked, and I was not very comfortable with it. He spoke to me and said, you need to speak to my friend Ray. And Ray just said, so how are you doing? And I think I'm doing fine. And in the middle of that, the Holy Spirit says, no, you're not. The Holy Spirit is over Ray now. He needs to talk. When Ray began to pray for me, I didn't expect it. This is something I had even told Ray on the phone. I said, this is not something I'm exactly comfortable with. I don't really believe in this. I believe that sure, God can heal. I know that Jesus has the power to heal anybody He wants to heal. I get that, but this isn't something that constantly happens. This is not a church thing. There was a piece there. There was something that was connecting with me that was saying, this is real, this is good, and you're getting help at this time. And as these things I started to move along with the prayer, and as things started to become more and more free, this freedom was an intense feeling of relief. The interesting thing to me was the test the next day when I woke up. I realized, hey, I don't normally feel as sore as I normally do this morning, which I was like, okay, I'm having a good day. It happens every once in a while. I'll be free of pain for the most part for maybe a day. And then it comes back. And I tried many things with trying to get rid of my pain. I tried exercise. I tried different neurological drug regimens, and nothing really ever helped. And so this is where I really started going, wait, I feel a little bit different than even on my normal day. And had contact with Ray and explained to him, I feel really, really good. And this stood the test of time, and the fibromyalgia is gone. So I've let this whole, 15, 20 years of helping people learn more about God, and here I am doubting the fact that He can walk right in and go, I don't need this for your life, this is not my plans for your life, this is not who I am, and I'm going to free you of that. I doubted all that. And so there was some guilt associated with that, and then again, through some more prayer, we let that go. And that was extremely freeing because there was no shame in it. There was no guilt. There was nothing associated with any negative feelings at all. It was just like, look, I did this for you for a reason. I've got a lot of plans for you. I just want you to know that I love you and I care. When you see yourself through the eyes of God, it's huge. Because there's nothing greater than seeing who you really are through His eyes, and the love that He has for you, the plans that He has for you, and realizing that everything took place because it needed to for a reason, and He's got you. That's where we really are. Being a person of action and being able to take control of situations and being helpless is hard. And He said it's okay. It's all right. I get it. I understand it's a struggle for you, but I'm bigger than your struggle. That He didn't have any intention of letting things be as they were. He had anything to do with it. And I can promise you that greater is the God who is in me than He was in the world, because of that guy had my back. So, did you guys put it there?
We're taught in our American society, particularly us men, that no matter how bad it's been for us, you just got to suck it up, get over it. Talking about it, complaining about it only makes you look weak. In the military and first responders, if you say that you're actually having a problem with the things that you've seen, they put a label on you and they call it PTSD, and everybody looks at you funny, and it's like almost a curse type of thing. The reality is that your soul was never meant by God to ever experience some of the things that you've experienced. You live in a sin-filled, sick, broken, dark world. And people get their hearts hurt and their souls shattered because of the things that happen. I was just in Brazil 2 weeks ago, and I gave a brief message on this. This is in a Baptist church with over 5,000 people in it. And at the end of my message, I had one of the pastors come to me and say, "Can you please come?" Now, we're in Portuguese here, and I don't speak Portuguese, but we're translating Portuguese. And I go back, and here's a beautiful young woman. She's probably in her late 20s. She's a pastor's wife. But as a child, her father sexually abused her and then sold her out to be trafficked to other people. And although she knew Jesus Christ and got away from her family and married this really kind young pastor, all of that weight of that trauma followed her and carried her through that moment. And the lie that she listened to was, I'm not worth anything except what my Father did to me. That's all I'm worth. And see, my friends, that's a lie. I had the privilege of, with translators' help, leading her into some freedom, into some peace, because you see what she had tried to do is she had tried to commit suicide 3 times just in those past 2 weeks before I encountered her, because the weight of what she was carrying was so awful that she didn't know how to deal with it. This is why today in our America, an average of 22 veterans and active duty soldiers commit suicide every week, every day. Not every day, not every week, every day. An average of 22 commit suicide. Because no matter how strong they have been, no matter how strong emotionally and physically they've been, there's some trauma. There's trauma that we've never were designed to carry. And my brothers and sisters, everybody has a weakness. Weakness is nothing to be ashamed of. Weakness is something that we come to God with and allow Him to help us in the midst of our weakness. This is why the Apostle Paul wrote, it is the Spirit Himself that helps us in our weakness. And he later writes in Hebrews, it's written in Hebrews that we can approach the throne of grace to help us in times of weakness. So tonight, if you're here, and maybe you can relate to somebody like Eric, who not only carries the trauma of things that you've experienced, but it's actually physically affecting your body in a way that you carry a lot of pain. Maybe you're somebody like this young pastor's wife in Brazil who was horribly abused in ways that none of us would even want to think about. And you wonder to yourself, how can I ever get over that? Whatever the level of your trauma is, whatever the level of your pain is, whatever, how many pieces your soul is shattered in, I'm here tonight to give you good news. And the good news is this: He heals the brokenhearted. He binds up your wounds. He takes you out of the identity of being the afflicted, the traumatized, the victimized. And instead, He brings you into a place, by the power of His Spirit, into a place where you become an oak of righteousness. Somebody who's strong again, somebody who knows what it's like to no longer have your past dictate to you who you are. As a matter of fact, I always like to lead people in this one declaration. And if you'll join me in it, I think you'll get why it's so powerful. I'm going to say it and you repeat it after me. Because of Jesus Christ, for what He did for me, I am no longer defined by my history, by what I have done, or what has been done to me. I am defined by who my Father calls me. He calls me His beloved child, in whom He is well pleased. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to end our time together, and I'm going to pray for you as just as a corporate group. And then there's going to be an amazing group of people that are going to be down here at the front. And if anything that I've said tonight, if anything that you've heard, whether it's through the music, the testimonies, touches your heart and you know that you'd like to leave out of here free of the pain that you carry, I'm here tonight to say to you, it will happen for you. If you will just let down your walls, if you'll just trust one more person, if you allow us to minister healing and grace, strength and life to you, we want to do that for you right now in Jesus' name. As I pray, worship team, if you want to come up and get ready with the music. You know, tonight I feel that there's somebody in the room, and once again, I get this by the Holy Spirit, where you've been thinking about suicide.